especially the name Sufism. But there's the famous hadith, again, this is one of the most authentic, and this is a hadith that tells us that the Prophet was sitting with his companions in Medina, and he told them that a man of the garden is about to walk into the mosque. And then this man came in. He was of the Ansar, and his name was Sufyan, but to this day we don't know who he really was. There were 4 Sufyans among the Ansar, and we don't know which one he was. And he was poor, he was unknown, he was insignificant, and he walked in the mosque. He had just made wudu, and we are told his beard was dripping with water, and he was shaking his beard. He had his sandals in his hand, and he said, "Assalamu alaikum," to everyone, and he came in and prayed. Well, the Sahaba witnessed that, and among them was a young boy who would be one of the most brilliant transmitters of hadith, and that is Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. May Allah be pleased with them. So Abdullah, he's just a little boy, but he saw that. And then the next day, the same thing happened. And the third day, the next thing happened. The Prophet said, a man of the garden is about to come through the door. And again, it was Sufyan, the Ansari. So Abdullah ibn Amr, he says, I'm going to get to the root of this. So he followed Sufyan home, who was a poor man. And he said, my father and I had a fight, and I can't sleep at his house for 3 days, 3 nights. Would you let me sleep in your house? And so Sufyan says, of course, come in. So from the hadith, we see that he probably had just a 1-room house. That was typical. And he had his bed. And so Abdullah is watching him all night. He must be praying all night, but he didn't get up to pray. He goes to Isha, he comes home, he eats whatever he has, and he gives Abdullah, and then he goes to bed. And he must be fasting every day, but he didn't fast a single day. And he said, I watched him all night. He said, the only thing I could notice is that whenever he would turn in his sleep, he would say, Allah, Allah, Allah. And he said, I began to despise his worship. Because Abdullah ibn Amr, he expected to see this man, doing all kinds of miraculous things all day and all night. But he kept his company, and he's just an ordinary man. He prays the 5 prayers in the mosque. He does what Muslims are supposed to do, but there's nothing special about him at all. So after 3 days, Abdullah ibn Amr, he says to Sufyan, he says, there was no problem between me and my father, but the Prophet ﷺ said this about you. And so I wanted to see what is so remarkable about you, but really, what I saw was not so remarkable. And Sufyan said, but that's all there is. That's all there is. Again, he's a sincere man, and he's, of course, delighted that the Prophet ﷺ has given him these incredible good tidings. And so you can imagine, he's thinking, but what would it be? He says, wait a minute, because Abdullah is now turning to go away. He said, wait a minute, there is something. He said, I never go to sleep at night, but that I have gotten out of my heart any enmity, any duplicity, any ghish for another person, and any hasad. So he said, this I do, that before I go to bed, I make sure that in my heart there is no duplicity towards anyone. There is no envy of anyone. And then the young boy, Abdullah, he said, that's it. That's it. And he said, that's what's difficult to do. So these were people of the heart. And this man who has been promised the garden, his secret is a secret that no one can see but God. And God's messenger is given that secret. But that's what makes all the difference. And there's so many stories like this, and the Sahaba knew that very well. We're told the story of a woman in Medina who prayed and prayed and prayed and fasted and fasted and fasted. But she was extremely sharp with her tongue, and no one escaped her tongue. And she was lashing and scourging her neighbors with her tongue all the time. So they asked the Prophet about her, and he said, she will be among the people of the fire. So that's not piety. That's not piety. Piety has got to be something that transforms you and transforms your heart. And of course, this is one of the great fruits of Ihsan, of this beauty of truly knowing God, truly loving God, truly being in God's presence. You know, that makes you so conscious of your own limitations, and that also elevates in your eyes the worship, the reality of other people. So these are very important things. We know the Hadith. This is again one of the most authentic of all the transmissions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he blessed the Yemen. Even in Arabic, the word Yemen, which means the south, it means also Yuman, which is barakah, blessing. It's always associated with blessing. And the Yemen is said to be the homeland of the Semites. The Semites come out of Arabia and they disperse throughout Arabia, but many people say they all go back to the Yemen. That's where they all originally come from. The Yemen is a blessed place, and one of the realities of the beautiful people of the Yemen, may God protect them in this time and set them right, is they never disbelieved in a single prophet or messenger, ever. That's one of their prides. The Prophet said, God blessed the Yemen. And he said also that Iman is Yemeni, that faith is Yemeni in its spirit. And he blessed the Sham, which is greater Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, what is today Syria and Jordan. And there was a man there from Najd. Najd is the plateau region of central Arabia. And he said, bless the Najd. And the Prophet, who's very polite, said nothing. And the Najdi said again, bless the Najd. And the Prophet said nothing. And he said, bless the Najd. And the Prophet again said nothing. And then the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if it were not for two signs that arise there, being the sun, because he's in Medina, so the sun will rise over Najd, and the full moon, I wouldn't look in that direction, because that is where the two horns of Satan will arise. The movement of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is a Najdi movement. And the Khawarij, who are the first major test to shake Islam to the root, are also a Najdi movement. So the Prophet said that that's where the horns of Satan will rise. That's where Riyadh is. That's the capital of Saudi Arabia. So anything that comes from Najd, you want to be very careful about it. We have to be very cautious about it. This is an absolutely authentic hadith. And the Prophet described these Khawarij who would come out of Najd. And he said they will be people that pray all the time. They fast all the time. They recite the Quran all the time. If you, the companions who pray and fast, were to compare your fasting to theirs, it would be as if you didn't fast. And if you were to compare your prayer to theirs, it would be as if you don't pray. And they recite the Quran all the time, but it never goes deeper than their collarbones. In other words, they get the sounds right, and in Arabic, we use the entire voice box. It's one of the amazing things about the Arabic language. 14 moon letters, 14 sun letters. But the first letter, which is the glottal stop or the hamza, it comes from just above the collarbone. So they get the sounds right, but these sounds do not take the meanings that they are filled with into their hearts, because their hearts are hard. And the Prophet said of them also, they are sharrul khalqi wal khaliqa. They are the worst of all creation and all created beings. So these are all warnings in context that, if you want the way of God, there can't be any ego involved in it. There can't be any fanaticism in it. It's got to be rooted in the purity of the heart. And that's the way the companions were, and that's the way the Salaf as-Salih were. And therefore, they were people of Ihsan. And yet, what do they call that phenomenon? In early Islamic history, it's well known, especially by the time of the 4th century, the 300s, the 900s of the Common Era, that the word Sufism had spread. Some people say that it probably spread popularly. It probably was just a popular word that people liked and they used. By the 4th century, this word had become a universal word in the Islamic vocabulary, but many of the great Sufi masters, they said Sufism was a reality that had no name. And now it has become a name that has no reality. These are the kind of paradoxical statements that they love and they make, and in them there's always a warning. But in any case, we want to talk a little bit, about, this beautiful word. And it's very important for us to take interpretive control over our reality, our religion. We don't leave that to other people to do. In that process of taking interpretive control, it's very important for us to get vocabulary right. And one of the great distinctions of Islamic civilization is that we were people who were very conscious of words. And we were very careful how we used them. We defined them carefully. And we used them, with great care. We need to do the same thing, but we've also got to make sure that certain words are not sullied. Today, for example, in the West, the word Sharia, which is one of the most beautiful words that there is. The Sharia is the pathway that leads you to water, that gives you life. It is the word that we use for the prophetic law. It's a beautiful word. And then we have other words that come under it. But we've got to make sure that we use that word and we love that word and we protect that word. And we don't allow journalists and others to vilify it, as is being done today, to undercut whatever we have. And of course, jihad is another word like that, and we could think of others. But the attack on the Sufi legacy, this has been one of the most poisonous tendencies among Muslims of the last 200 years in particular. And of course, it's not universal. And, Muslims have never ever concurred on that as a whole. But it's very important for us to understand that Sufism is a beautiful word. And we've got to use it because this word did become one of the most basic words of our tradition. And when we open the books of our tradition, we will always find references to Sufis and to Tasawwuf and so forth. And we can't be shocked by that. One of the things that the Wahhabi movement has done and its various Salafi branches over the last 200 years in particular is to create an allergy towards this word among many Muslims. And you see that in many parts of the Arab world. It's not universal in the Arab world by any means. But in many parts of the Arab world, if you say Sufi, then it's almost like a profanity. Nothing else can be said that's good. If you associate a man or a woman with Sufism, then basically they are ostracized. In the United States, we have unfortunate examples of misguided communities infected by the Salafist and the Wahhabi ideology who have been told that certain brothers of ours, I could mention their names to you, and you'd know that they're really good people. There's no need to mention their names. But they go into certain areas, and then it is said in the local mosques that he's a Sufi. And so he's not invited to come, nor is he invited to come back. One of our great budding scholars, again, there's no need to mention his name, was invited to come to a mosque in Chicago. And so the slander that was spread against him to try to keep him from coming for fear that he might eclipse some of the people who were there, they're the ones who actually spread the slander, was that he's a Sufi. And so immediately, oh, well, there's questions about his aqeedah. No, there's no question about this aqeedah. If he's a real Sufi, then his aqeedah, is the way it ought to be. So this is one of the things I think that we want to be very clear about, that we must use this word respectfully. We use it the way that they did. We got to emphasize the fact that the Sufis were always their greatest self-critics. So just because someone raises the banner of Sufism, it doesn't mean that they are going to acknowledge their rectitude or their piety, because Sufism also has certain standards that it has to hold to. The Sufis were very, very critical of people and their own ranks and of themselves. But it's very important for us, to restore this word. And a lot of times you will hear people ask the question, but, where does the word come from? It's not mentioned in the Quran. It's not mentioned in the Hadith. One of the principles of Islamic faith and law and theology and philosophy and science as it developed historically is la mashahata fil alfaz. That, there is no, what would we say? What's the word I'm looking? Parsimony? There is no stinginess, in words. In other words, you can name things, different things. We are not restricted in that regard. A word like aqeedah, which we use as basic creed. Usually we use it for required creed. That word also is not based on the Quran or the Sunnah. That is a neologism. It's a word that was created because because that word served a particular purpose. And in the development of Islamic law, Islamic theology, Islamic thought, Islamic civilization, we often develop words. So Sufism is a neologism, that's true. But that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. And let's take a look at that word and its background just a little bit. First of all, as we saw from Hadith Jibreel, the phenomenon of tasawwuf, the phenomenon of purifying the heart and being the best that we can be and worshiping our Lord as if we could see Him, that is something that is rooted in the prophetic legacy. And the Prophet ﷺ referred to that as Ihsan. And Ihsan, as you know, is a word that occurs repeatedly in the Quran in various forms and repeatedly in Hadith. So these are the people of Ihsan. And in order to attain and to maintain that great state and station, then they have to have sciences, they have to have training. And of course, this is what they will develop. They get that from the Prophet ﷺ, they get it from his companions. And we talked about that in the Zawiyah that we had in 2013 here at Rosales, how the science of tasawwuf evolves out of the Hadith of Jibreel, just like all the other sciences of Islam, in law, in theology, and other things, come out of this Hadith as well. But the thing is that Ihsan could never be a name for these people, because these are people who are cloaked in humility, and they can never take off that cloak. And one of the first principles of tasawwuf is beware of the maker of claims. Doesn't mean that if a man makes a claim, that claim is necessarily false, because the great Sufis, they do make claims from time to time. In fact, sometimes they have to make claims. They're required to do that. But beware of the maker of claims, because this is not their way. They don't like to make claims, and they like to shroud themselves and hide themselves in the cloak of hiddenness and humility. It is said that الظهور من حق الأنبياء والخفاء من حق الأولياء, that appearance, being manifest, is one of the duties or the rights of the prophets. The messengers and the prophets, they couldn't hide the fact that they were messengers and prophets, and they had to tell the truth about God. This is the reason why many of them were persecuted and killed, because they said things people didn't want to hear. And we have to remember that many of the people who persecuted and killed the prophets in the past did it out of self-righteousness, because the prophet would tell them things that they did not want to hear. And therefore, in attacking that prophet, they attacked him as a false prophet. That's the way many of them were killed. And as we said before, in our tradition, those who reject the awliya, their hearts are identical to the hearts of those who killed the prophets in the past. But you can't use that name Ihsan, because then you won't be a muhsin. We can't say, we are muhsinun. We are people of Ihsan, because once you say that, you cease to be one. The path of Ihsan is the path of the awliya. It's the path of the friends of God, the saints, those who are closest to God. Again, if we were to diverge a little bit, the saint in the Bible is Qiddish, which in Arabic would be Qiddis. Qiddis, it's the person who is muqaddas. In other words, they are absolutely holy. They are purified by the name of God the Holy. They have in them, no trace of anything defective. And it's very difficult to be a Qiddis. That's a very high level. So sainthood in the Bible, like so many things in the biblical tradition, has a very high bar, very high standard. Whereas in Islam, this is again one of the mercies of God, and it's a reflection of the beauty of that early community. The bar is quite low. Anyone who truly believes will be in aman. They will be in security. God will protect them, and they will be allowed to grow. And they are always awliya, friends of God, as long as they believe. And they will be qiddisin. They will grow to that someday, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, but they don't begin there. But nevertheless, you can't call yourself a wali. We are the awliya of Allah. That would be, again, to invert that reality. It wouldn't be true. So what do you call these people? And that's why they say, again, they were people with no name. They were people that had a reality that had no name. They lived it. They loved it. They transmitted it. They spread the religion. And we'll talk about that perhaps a little bit tomorrow. Who are the people who spread this religion throughout the world? The Sufi is always the son of his time, or the daughter of his time. One of the great awliya of North Africa, Ibn Ulaywa, Ibn Alawi, he says, don't expect the wali of the 19th century to speak the words of the 20th century. And don't expect the wali of the 20th century to speak the words of the 20th century, 21st. They speak to their time, but they do speak to their time, and they do that very effectively. And there's so many stories, we don't want to take up time. Again, Jalaluddin, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi is one of the epitomes of that. Because, to know him, you must know his time. And you must know that he spoke to his time. He spoke to his people. And he came just before one of the greatest disasters that would ever occur in Islam, which was the Mongol invasion. And he prepares people to continue this faith and to spread this faith, for the centuries that come after that. So he belongs to his time. And the more that we know about his time, the more that we understand about him. The Sufi always speaks about his time. One of the amazing things that intrigued me was, how did Islam spread to Indonesia, especially to the island of Java, the beautiful island of Java. And in Java you had a really amazing Hindu-Buddhist rice culture, and very worth studying, by the way. Very amazing. And so who are the people who bring that beautiful message to Java? Well, they are the Wali Sangho, the 9 saints, the 9 awliya. And one of them, whom I happen to love very much, his name is Kali Jaga, which means protector of the rivers. Why he's called that, I don't know. But he was actually an aristocrat. He was a Javanese aristocrat. And in his time, Islam was beginning to spread in Java, and he didn't like that. And he, in fact, attempted to kill one of the Wali Sangho, one of the 9 great saints. And he met him in the forest, and he was going to kill him. He was dressed as a robber. He wasn't a robber. And that saint said to him, "What is it that you want? Would you like gold?" And he said, "Yes, I'd like gold. I'm a robber." He said, "But then look around you and take as much as you want." And he said the whole forest became gold. And then Kali Jaga, he took the hand of the Shaykh. And the Shaykh then left him in a state of isolation for many years. And then Kali Jaga finally is given permission to go forth. And he wears green. And again, he's an aristocrat, Javanese aristocrat, but he goes to the rice peasants and he teaches them new ways to farm. He will go in the rice paddies and farm with them. And he did other things. They loved him. And then he has to teach them Islam. And so how does he do that? Puppet shows. So Kali Jaga develops the Javanese puppet. And in the beginning, he uses the typical Malay puppet. And if you go to Malaysia, you can still see these puppets. There was another one of the Wali Sangho, whose name is Sunangiri. And he told Kali Jaga that, you need to learn your religion a little bit more. You can't use these puppets. These puppets are not perfectly halal. And so Kali Jaga says, well, let me think about that. So then he creates the Javanese puppet. And if you have seen Javanese puppets, they have very thin necks and very long arms, and they're very strange in their shape. And he said, do you think this could ever live? No. So he said, we'll use these puppets. So he used the Javanese puppets. And then he takes the gamelan music, which is distinctively Indonesian Javanese music. When you hear it the first time, you may not like it very much because it has a whole different sound pattern than what we in the West are used to. But he redefines gamelan music. He redefines everything. Colors, white, blue, green, red, numbers, 2. There would be a temple, and in front of the temple would be generally 2 banyan trees, which are associated with the Buddha, right? And so he said, whenever you see these 2 trees, 1, 2, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. He redefines everything. He takes interpretive control. And then he is one of the people at the center of that miracle of bringing these beautiful people of Java into Islam. and making them love it, and making it this force that transforms them. So this will be the story of the Sufis. You can see it in Central Asia, among the Turkic tribes, the Mongol tribes. You see it, of course, in the Ottoman Empire. You see it in Jalaluddin, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. These are the people who are the heirs of the prophets. These are the people who represent that beauty, which is faith in God and faith in the prophets. But again, they can't call themselves the heirs of the Prophet. They can't call themselves the awliya. They can't call themselves the mukhlisin, the sincere ones, or the sadiqeen. They can't call themselves the muhsinin. So what do they call themselves? And I don't think that was necessarily a big problem for them, because they're quite glad not to be called anything but just a servant of God, hopefully. But in any case, one of the things about the word Sufi as it develops is that it becomes really just about the best word you could have, because nobody knows what it means. And when we look at the word Sufi, some people say, like the late Martin Links, may God have mercy on him, Abu Bakr Sirajuddin, he says, well, we could say the woolen ones. They're woolen, from wool, you know, although many Sufis didn't wear wool. But Suf, wool, that would be the most obvious etymological root, but it's probably not the root. Some people might say it's from Sophia, which is the Greek word for wisdom, love of wisdom. Some people have said it's from Suffa. And of course, the people of Suffa were those companions of the Blessed Prophet ﷺ that lived on, that had their own special area in the Prophet's mosque, which is today in the mosque in Medina, a platform that's behind the houses of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's where Abu Huraira and the other Ahlus Suffa would stay. And they were people devoted just to God and just to God's Prophet. And they didn't want to ever be away, not for a moment. And they didn't care if they got food or they didn't get food, if they got clothing or they didn't get clothing. So the Sufis are very much like Ahlus Suffa. And that is, without any question, one of their clearest reference in the lives of the companions, although all the companions had this characteristic, not just Ahlus Suffa. And Sufi is not the same as Sufi. Some say it comes from Safa, because they were people of purity. But again, the etymology doesn't quite work out. And of course, Safa would not be one of the words they could use. They can't say, we are pure people, and you're not. You know, so this is one of the great predicaments that they had. Beware of the maker of claims. And one of the amazing things is that even after the word Sufi will become established among us as an honorable and great word and a pinnacle to be aspired after, that very few Sufis will ever use the word. And very few of them will ever apply it to themselves. And God honored me to be with men and women who I believe definitely belong to that path. And never did any of them call themselves a Sufi. Or for that matter, a Shaykh or a Shaykh. Other people might say that. I remember once I was going around the Kaaba with my great Shaykh Muhammad Abu Bakr, whom Adiba remembers so well. He was an illustrious man, really, an amazing man. And there was a Yemeni who I knew, and he knew us. And he came running out of, the people were sitting around the Kaaba, it was nighttime. And he came running up to me, and he took my hand. I was always walking behind the Shaykh. I don't like to walk next to him or in front of him. And he said, you've got to know he's a murabbi. You've got to know that he is a complete master. You know, and so then they went to sit down. So other people may tell you about them, but they don't usually do that themselves. In fact, the only thing I remember Shaykh Muhammad Abu Bakr, may God have mercy upon him, saying about himself is that he was a Tufayli. He said, I am a Tufayli. Tufayli in Arabic, we sometimes translate it as parasite. But literally the word Tufayli, it means uninvited wedding guest, because there was a man whose name was Tufayl in Iraq, and he stayed in good health, and he always ate well by going to every wedding feast that was held. So whenever there was a wedding, Tufayl will be there. And so therefore, the uninvited wedding guest we call Tufayli. And when the word parasite came, when Arabs wanted to translate the word parasite, then they used the word Tufayli also, because the parasite is like that. But that's what he would say. He said, I am the Tufayli of the Sadat. I am the uninvited wedding guest, of these people. So this is the way they were. They were people of great humility and, great care even about the names they use. There are certain names which occur frequently. Often they call themselves the people. And someone like me, taking liberties in translation, might put in brackets the people of God. Probably I shouldn't do that, because they don't do that. And again, if they meant by that, we are the people of God, then immediately it would invalidate its purpose. But they're just the people. They're a particular type of people. They love each other. They're attracted to each other. They learn from each other. They are al-qawm. Al-qawm. Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, may Allah be pleased with him, one of his sheikhs was Abu Madyan, who was the great light of North Africa, and who also took from Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And Abu Madyan has a beautiful poem about the adab of the murid. And so Ibn Arabi will take 2 verses and then he adds 3. So it's called takhmis. He makes it 5 verses. And he says, Ya taliban min ladhadhati duna watara. O you who may be seeking something earnestly about the pleasures of nearness, dunya, which also sounds like dunya, because if you do want the dunya, these would be the people to get it from. In aradta jami' al-khayri alayka tura, if you want all good to be manifested on yourself, al-mustasharu aminun fasma' al-khabara, the counselor is trustworthy, namely Abu Madyan, so listen to what he has to say. And then he says, what does he say? He said, ما لذة العيش إلا صحبة الفقراء هم السلاطين والسادات والأمراء. He says, the deliciousness, the pleasure of this life is nothing but keeping the company of the poor, because they are the fuqara. That's one of the words they will use. And the word darwish, which in English becomes dervish, it actually means that. It means faqir. So that's one of the words they will use for themselves. They want to be fuqara. They want to be people whose contingency and whose dependence upon God utterly is manifest in everything they do, every breath they take. So he said, if you want to have pleasure in this life, then keep the company of the fuqara. And this would be Jalaluddin al-Rumi. And this would be Shams al-Tabrizi. And this would be Jalaluddin's father. And this would be Abu Yazid al-Bistami and al-Junayd and all, because this is the quality they always have. That quality of faqr, of essential poverty, which our brother Sidi Muhammad Isa Wali talked about beautifully in the poem that he gave us today. This is always their characteristic, this faqr. But he says, Humus salatinu was-sadatu wal-umara. They are the sultans. They are the lords, and they are the princes. Even though they might dress in rags, and even though they might be pushing a fruit cart down the street that they sell from, But if you were in this world and you wanted to get ahead in this world and the Sultan loves you, or the Sayyid, the head of the people, loves you, or the prince loves you, then you'll probably get what you want. They're generally very generous with the people they love, but that they are the sultans, not the worldly sultan. They are the Sadat, they are the masters, and they are the Umara, they are the princes, because all creation goes around us, around them. And as our dear brother Shams, may Allah bless him, showed us today, this incredible symbolism of the Rumi experience, because this was his how. He didn't develop this. This is what he did. This is what Allah made him do in his ecstasy, in his realization, as if he's taking down these blessings from heaven and he's distributing them to the earth. But this is what they do. So in any case, they are the people. They are the people. One of the most common expressions that's used for them is that they are the people of Tawheed, the people of God's oneness. And they do often refer to their group that way. They would again be very careful about calling themselves that personally, but they are the people of Tawheed. And their Tawheed is the real Tawheed. And, as our brother Shaykh Muhammad Isa Wali said today, the Aqidah, the belief of Rumi, is clearly orthodox. Okay, they have a very orthodox, and that's the foundation that they build their lives on. The Shaykh al-Akbar, who is really, what many people say, the blessing of Rosales is his blessing, because he was born not far from here. There are people that have had amazing spiritual openings here at Rosales where they actually saw the Shaykh al-Akbar, coming out of the greenness of the spring growth. So this is his land. This is where he is from. But in the beginning of his Futuhat Makkiyah, he gives his Aqidah. He says, I want you to know this is what I believe. And it is a thoroughly orthodox, thoroughly acceptable theology. And he said also, I want you to know that whatever I say, don't think I've ever departed from this, because I have not. Whatever I say has got to be understood as resting on this foundation. It never contradicts it. It explains it. It fulfills it. So they are the people of Tawheed. And they are the people who, the science of Tawheed to them is not just a theology. It's an anthropology. It's a sociology. It's a culture. It's a way of life. And Tawheed for them means to relate everything back to God. In the poem that our brother Sidi Muhammad gave us just a few hours ago, Imam Rumi talks about the mole and the beauty of the mole. And moles are not beautiful, but on the beautiful face they are. And that even if you look in ugly things, you can find beauty. So they relate everything back to God. And they do this not just as an intellectual or spiritual habit, but they see it. They see how all creation glorifies the greatness of God. Again, Abu Madyan, this great master who lived across the water, he says, "Man la wujuda li dhatihi min dhatihi, fawujuduhu lawlahu aynul muhali." So he says, that which has no existence from its essence for its essence, you, me, the trees, all these things that Rumi says, Allah bless him and give us his blessings, are painted on these oceans of non-being by the Creator who creates from nothing in every moment. So he says, that which has no existence from its essence for its essence, like me, my glasses, this, you, the tree, the clouds, the mountains, its existence, if it were not for Him, God, who has necessary being, and who is the real and the wonder of wonders, would be the very essence of impossibility. Everything finite points to the infinite. Everything contingent points to the non-contingent. So this is the reality of Tawheed, relating everything back to Him. And so they are the muwahhids. And for that reason also, they will give us as a gift the world view of perfect metaphysics that enables us to make sense of everything in creation. And as it's said about the Shaykh al-Akbar, and this could be said about Mawlana Jamaluddin Rumi, they have an answer for everything. And yet you can never know really where they stand, because whatever station you imagine them to be, they will be above that station. And this is what Islamic civilizations of the past. Islam is the religion, that creates civilization. We were the masters of that wherever we went. In Java, in Sumatra, in China, Central Asia, East Africa, West Africa, Anatolia, Europe, Bosnia, Bulgaria, here in Spain and Portugal, the islands, and so forth. Wherever Muslims went, they created these incredible civilizations. They brought life to people. They brought out the beauty that was there. But this was all related to the secret of Tawheed, relating everything back to God and everything back to God's oneness. There are also other words for the Sufis. They were known as Nasik, people of great devotion, Zahid, ascetics. Of course, among the Sufis, there's a lot of discussion about the Zahid, if he or she doesn't go further than that. So, but the Sufi always goes through a stage of zuhud. Just like in the Sama' of Mawlana Jalaluddin, you take off the black robe that stands for the world. You cast it behind you, and then you go into this state in the white garment, which is like your shroud. So they are Zahids, although the Zahid needs to grow beyond that. There's a famous story, of a great sheikh in Morocco who lived on the sea, the Atlantic Ocean, and he fished. And he would catch lots of fish, and he would feed himself and his murids, and the rest he would give as sadaqah. And then one of his murids wanted to go to another town in Morocco. And so he said, when you go there, you have to visit my friend. He's a great wali of Allah. You have to visit him. You have to give him my salams. And you have to ask him advice for me. And so this man went to that town. Ibn Ajiba tells us this story. And he asked about that friend. And he said, well, he lives down that street in that palace. And so this man goes up to this incredible palace. And he can even look through the door and see servants running back and forth, gardens and fountains. And he feels this must be a mistake. And he doesn't even want to go in. I mean, his sheikh is a man who lives in great poverty, on the fish of the sea that he catches. And then a coach comes up, drawn by these horses, and this beautiful man comes out who's dressed like a king. And so he said, this is the man that you're looking for. And so he really doesn't even want to go in. Again, the Sufi has to have a good opinion of people. And then the man says, who are you? And he said, I'm so-and-so, and I'm coming from so-and-so. He said, you have to come in. And so he brings him in, and the place is like the Garden of Paradise. And the man feels very much out of place. He doesn't really know how to relate to this. And then the other saint, he says, and what did the sheikh say to you? And he said, he asked me to ask you for advice. And so he said, give him this advice. When will you ever get the world out of your heart? And this is devastating. It's like, what? I mean, you say that in this context, this palace? And so he goes back to his sheikh, and the sheikh says, did you see my friend? He said, yes. And he said, what was it like? And I said, well, he's quite well-to-do. And he said, did he give you advice for me? And he said, yes. He said, what was it? He said, I can't say it. He said, no, you have to. He said, when will you ever get the world out of your heart? And the sheikh broke down and he began to cry. He said, that's the difference between me and him. I could never get beyond this. I could never take the world if it came into my hands. And he could. The world means nothing to him. He will give it away as freely as he gets it. So, and these are the stories they talk about. The Zahid, if the Zahid doesn't grow beyond that. And if he doesn't, of course, the Faqir, the Darwish, the Abid, and their other words. I think we're just about out of time if we're not out of time.